Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the National Cover Crop Variety Test Report webinar. My name is Olivia Cayuet with the University of Missouri Center for Regenerative Agriculture. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide farmers, crop advisors, conservation professionals, members of the seed industry, and other cover crop enthusiasts with an overview of the first National Cover Crop Variety Test Report. This work is led by the University of Missouri's Center for Regenerative Agriculture, working closely with the American Seed Trade Association and over a dozen partner organizations, including seed companies, land-grant universities, as well as USDA's Agricultural Research Service and Natural Resources Conservation Service. A few notes about today's event. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted to the CRA YouTube channel afterwards. We'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. So as questions or comments come up, please drop those in the chat. This is also a Zoom meeting, so you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask questions. Without further ado, here to kick us off with some opening remarks is Keith Burns of Green Cover Crop Seed.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. I just wanted to share a bit of our perspective. Green Cover is a national seller of cover crops, so we're selling cover crops to all 50 states. So we have a pretty good perspective of the industry and where this is all going. And I was asked just to share a little bit about the importance of cover crop variety, not only testing, but development of new varieties, which is one of the goals of this program as well. And I just wanted to throw this a little bit of a word picture out because as I was thinking about this is what came to my mind. So imagine that, you have a house and you're wanting to build a big addition onto your house. And you're going to do it yourself, but the only tools that you have is what currently exists in your garage. And so could you do that addition with the tools that you have in your garage? Probably, but is it going to be very efficient? Are they really the right tools, or are they just ones that you can kind of make work, but they're there's probably better tools out there in order to get the job done? And I think the answer is, yeah, if I was going to build an addition onto my house, I would need more tools to really do it right. And that's kind of where we're at with cover crops. The majority of the cover crops that we're using are just seeds that were already existing. And they're getting by and we're getting the job done. But many of us in the industry think there probably should be better tools out there in order to accomplish these specific things that we would really like to accomplish. And so that's what the Cover Crop Development Network, the Cover Crop Testing Program is doing, is they're working on taking tools that we have and making them better and finding new tools to fit niches that just really aren't being covered. A lot of the cover crops, some of the best cover crops are actually some of the really old varieties, because as a general rule over the years, as something has been bred and developed specifically for grain production, it becomes less useful and less valuable as a cover crop because it's serving a different purpose. That tool has a different purpose. And so what we're looking at doing with this program, with some of these grants, is breeding specifically for the cover crop characteristics that we want, which is, rooting depth and some of these other characteristics of winter survivability or alleliopathy. And sometimes we want more and sometimes we want less, and all of these are being looked at. But really, we're looking at developing things specifically for these cover crop goals that we're looking at doing, and not just at grain production. So it's all about getting better tools in your garage in order to do that building project that we want to do. And that's why I'm excited about some of the new things that are coming out of this program, some of the improvements that are being made, and some of the data that we're getting, because it's a area that's just had a void for a long time. And now we're finally starting to look at it. And that's why I'm excited about this program and would encourage people to continue to be active participants in it. So Olivia, I hope that helped. I hope that kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about and looking at.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Keith, and for all your hard work getting quality cover crop seed into the hands of farmers. Next, we'll be hearing from Dr. Etienne Sutton from the University of Missouri Center for Regenerative Agriculture about the contents of the report and next steps for the program.
Thanks, Olivia. I'm really excited to be sharing the results of our first National Cover Crop Variety Test report with everyone today. The cover crop variety testing program is currently part of a Sustainable Agriculture Systems grant from the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture that brings together researchers, conservation professionals, seed industry members, and farmers to help reach a national goal of 40 million acres of cover crops by 2030. And to meet that goal, we recognize that farmers need access to high quality cover crop varieties that are suitable for their region, goals, and systems. For example, the photo here shows two different varieties of Balanza clover. The variety on the left has been specifically bred for use as a high biomass, high nitrogen annual cover crop, whereas the variety on the right is an older variety with dramatically different characteristics in terms of growth, maturity, etc., that might make it a less suitable option as a cover crop. So we really believe that finding the right cover crop for each farming system is really key to maximizing the economic and conservation benefits of this practice. So we launched a cover crop variety testing network last fall in partnership with 12 sites spanning a wide range of soil and climatic conditions. We owe a big thank you in particular to our collaborators at North Carolina State University, Chris Reberg Horton, Alyssa Woodard, and Slater Enriquez Inoa for planning and coordinating this variety testing program. The trials include 25 different cover crop varieties representing 6 species, including winter pea, crimson clover, hairy vetch, cereal rye, winter canola, and radishes. The varieties are a combination of commercially available varieties and those that are nearing the release and commercialization stage. The varieties marked with an asterisk here are experimental varieties from the Cover Crop Breeding Network, which is a public plant breeding program working to develop new and improved cover crop varieties that meet the needs of farmers across the U.S. More details about all of these varieties and the seed sources are available in the full report if you're interested. The trials were planted in a randomized split plot design with 3 replicates at each site. The cover crops were drill seeded into plots of roughly 5 by 15 feet using recommended seeding rates in the fall of 2024 and then left to overwinter into spring of 2025. The exact planting and termination dates varied by site based on typical management practices for each location. At each of those sites, collaborators collected a standard set of evaluation metrics, including fall emergence, which is a visual estimate of the percent of plants that emerged in the plot roughly 2 months after planting or before first frost, depending on location. And then, similar to fall establishment, spring stand was a visual estimate of the percent of plants emerging in the plot after spring green up and is a pretty good indicator of winter hardiness when assessed in conjunction with fall establishment. And then in the spring before termination, we collected shoot biomass samples in each plot using destructive sampling with a quadrat to quantify biomass in pounds per acre, which is directly linked to key benefits from cover crops, including nutrient retention, nitrogen supply from legumes, and potential for building soil health. We also evaluated cover crop maturity at termination by recording the percent of plants flowering in each plot. And then finally, we had the opportunity to test some new camera technology, pictured here, that will hopefully eliminate the need to perform destructive biomass sampling in the future by automating that process using AI and machine learning, which will make for a much more efficient data collection process. There were also a few optional evaluation metrics, including collecting root cores, which will allow for quantifying how root traits and biomass vary across species, varieties, and locations. If there were any diseases present, we took note of the percent of plants in the plot showing disease. Weed suppression was rated on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being excellent weed control and 5 being very poor weed control. And then finally, some sites also collected an average stand height measurement. The report includes a results table for each of the 12 sites, along with weather conditions at each site during the cover crop growing season. So this is an example from our Vermont site. The evaluation metrics are listed in the top row of the table, and then the species and varieties are along the leftmost column, and the values in the tables are the averages for each variety across those evaluation metrics. You'll want to note that the winter canola and radishes are both lumped together into a brassicas category at the bottom of the tables. And then in terms of analysis for each site, we analyzed the data to see if there were statistically significant differences across varieties for each species. And where there were significant differences, we indicated this with letters, such that any varieties that do not share a letter are indeed statistically different from each other. For example, across winter pea varieties in Vermont, there were significant differences in spring stand. Survivor, which is marked with an A, is a variety bred for winter hardiness and early green up, and showed significantly better spring stand than Frostmaster, which is marked with a B. The other 3 varieties, Wyo Winter, Austrian winter peas, and Keystone, are all marked with both an A and a B, which means that they had intermediate performance and were not significantly different from either Survivor or Frostmaster. So I'm not going to go through all 12 sites in this fashion, but wanted to at least give an overview of how to interpret these tables. And we also have a highlight section for each site in the report, summarizing these key takeaways. Okay, so let's dig into some of the results that we found in the first year of the trials. When we look at average performance of all the species and varieties across the 12 sites, we do see some important trends emerging even after just 1 year of data collection. The graph on the top here is showing fall emergence, and the one on the bottom is spring stand. Cereal rye had the best fall emergence and spring stand overall compared to the other species in the trials. And for the legumes, hairy vetch and crimson clover had slightly higher and more consistent spring stand than winter peas, suggesting a slight advantage in terms of winter hardiness. Here we have biomass shown in the top graph and weed suppression shown on the bottom graph. Both cereal rye and winter canola produced substantial amounts of biomass in the spring, though we do see some variation across varieties for each of those species, which we'll dig into more in a little bit. For the legumes, hairy vetch and winter pea produced slightly more spring biomass than crimson clover on average. And even though the radishes, so erify and driller, winter killed in most locations, I've included their fall biomass averages here on the graph to show that they produced as much biomass in that short window before frost as clover did in the spring. And then the last thing I want to note about biomass is that previous research has shown that aiming for a minimum threshold of 1,000 pounds per acre is really key to reducing nutrient losses from farm fields, and reaching 2,000 pounds per acre is when soil health benefits really start to kick in. And so far, all of the species and varieties in the trials do show potential for reaching those thresholds. And then for weed suppression in the bottom graph here, a score of 1 indicated very good weed control, whereas a higher score, so taller bars, meant the weed control was very poor. Both cereal rye and hairy vetch provided really strong weed control on average across the 12 sites. If we now dig into the results at the species level, some interesting patterns begin to emerge. For example, with cereal rye, we see strong evidence of regional adaptation across varieties. This graph shows that in California, Texas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, which were our trial sites with the mildest weather, there were 3 varieties marked with stars that had significantly higher biomass and earlier maturity than the other varieties. And those varieties were Renzo Bruzzi, Elbon, and an experimental variety from North Carolina called NC20R109. So all 3 of those would be good options for folks looking for rye varieties that are well suited for use in milder climates. On the other hand, in North Dakota, which had the harshest weather of all the sites, ND Gardner, which is a cereal rye variety specifically bred to withstand the harsh North Dakota winters, showed a significant advantage relative to the other rye varieties in terms of winter survival and biomass. It also had significantly earlier maturity than the other varieties. So these results are really demonstrating that selecting the right variety for your climatic conditions can be crucial for ensuring successful cover cropping. It's also worth noting that we found significant differences in other traits specifically related to breeding cereal rye for use in grazing or forage contexts. There was a forage variety in the trials that consistently had later maturity and shorter stand height than all the other varieties. So in addition to looking at regional adaptation, it's also important to consider traits that might be relevant to your particular management system and goals. When we look at brassicas, we found that the 2 radish varieties winter killed in all but 2 locations, so North Carolina and Texas, where the weather was relatively mild throughout the cover crop growing season. However, at sites where they were able to produce substantial biomass before winter kill, including New York, Indiana, and Missouri, they actually both offered excellent weed control in the spring due to the really thick residue mats that they left behind. For winter canola, all 3 varieties survived the winter at every site except North Dakota, where nothing but cereal rye survived. There was an experimental variety called KS4989 out of Kansas State, showing a modest performance advantage in New York, Indiana, and Missouri. On the other hand, a variety called Torrington, which is commercially available, seemed to lag behind a little bit in terms of fall establishment and spring biomass, particularly at sandier sites such as Maryland and North Carolina. And then CP1066 is a commercially available winter canola variety and did show relatively consistent performance across all of the sites. Similar to cereal rye, we found pretty strong evidence of regional adaptation for crimson clover varieties. In the Northeast, including New York, Vermont, and Pennsylvania, Hauser's Ostat stood out as the best performing variety. It was originally developed in Germany for hardiness zones 6 and lower, so it was a pleasant surprise to see it excel even as far north as Vermont. And then in the Midwest, including Missouri and Indiana, Kentucky Pride performed well and was developed by Go Seed to be a fast establishing, cold tolerant, and high biomass variety. Interestingly, it also did well in Maryland, which may be because it also has a high tolerance for wet soils, and it was a very wet fall around the time the trial was planted in Maryland. On the other hand, it was extremely dry in Missouri at the time of planting, suggesting that Kentucky Pride does show good tolerance to a range of planting conditions. And then in the Southeast, specifically North Carolina and Tennessee, an experimental variety from Maryland performed best in terms of biomass and was also significantly earlier to reach maturity than the other varieties, while Kentucky Pride showed later maturity at those Southeast sites. One of the most interesting things to emerge about vetch recently is that there has actually been a completely separate species of vetch hidden within hairy vetch germplasm called smooth vetch. Purple Bounty, which is sold as a hairy vetch variety, is actually mostly smooth vetch. And this discovery was made by Neil Toulouse of the Cover Crop Breeding Network. And I pulled this map here from their recently published paper showing that smooth vetch excels in the southeastern and Pacific Northwest regions of the US, shown in red on the map, whereas hairy vetch does better in the green areas. Smooth vetch is not as winter hardy as hairy vetch and also tends to struggle in loose soils, but can outperform hairy vetch in clay soils. So it was reassuring to find that our variety trial results do closely reflect their recent discovery. Specifically, at our two sites with sandy soils, Maryland and North Carolina, Purple Bounty produced roughly half as much biomass as the best performing variety at those sites. On the other hand, it did really well at the other two southeast sites, Tennessee and Texas, which had silt loam and clay loam soil, respectively. If we look at hairy vetch performance on average across the sites, we found that one of the cover crop breeding network's experimental varieties, called 22MNHV, produced 6 to 10% more biomass than the other varieties and is now moving towards commercial release given these promising results. For winter peas, we again saw some clear regional and climatic trends. In the Northeast, including New York, Vermont, and Pennsylvania, the Survivor and Wyo winter varieties had high winter survival and spring biomass, while Keystone and Frostmaster tended to underperform relative to the other varieties. At sites with milder climates, including Maryland, North Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Missouri, and California, Keystone appeared to have slightly earlier maturity than the other winter pea varieties, and Survivor slightly later maturity, but there were minimal difference in the other evaluation metrics at those sites. And then in Indiana, Nebraska, and North Dakota, there was very little winter survival for any of the winter pea varieties, indicating a need for continued plant breeding to develop more winter hardy options. So, to summarize a few of the key findings from this first year of the National Cover Crop Variety Testing Program, we found clear evidence that selecting cover crop species and varieties based on site-specific conditions can have significant benefits. When selecting varieties, it's important to consider multiple factors, including regional adaptation. So, does a variety seem to work well for your specific climate? Does the variety fit within your management system in terms of termination dates and methods, or if you plan to graze the cover crop? Does it tolerate the soil conditions in your field? And then finally, will it help meet any specific goals you might have, like weed control? So we're really excited to continue generating more information about cover crop variety performance and selection, including having data available on cover crop root traits soon, which play a really critical role in building soil health with cover crops. We'll also be generating data about how different species and varieties influence the soil microbiome and associated soil functions. And we have plans to continue expanding the number of sites, species, and varieties in future years. And as we gather more data, we also hope to develop decision support tools and other resources to aid in selecting varieties. For the upcoming 2025-2026 season, we are expanding our trial network to include 70 farmers across the US who will grow cover crop variety trials in their fields, helping to improve our understanding of variety performance across different environments and farming systems. And then finally, definitely keep an eye out for field days at variety trial sites in the future to see some of these really interesting comparisons in person. And then we certainly welcome your feedback as we refine and grow our variety testing program. If there are species, varieties, traits, or other types of information you'd like to see included in the program in the future, please do let us know by emailing me at etiennesutton@missouri.edu. And I'll go ahead and leave my contact information up here in case you need it. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Wonderful, Etienne. Thank you so much for sharing that report. While some people hopefully think of some questions, I'll kick us off with one. Now, you had mentioned several experimental varieties showing promise, and I'm wondering if you could just briefly explain what the typical timeline or process for getting those into farmers' hands might look like?
Sure, that's an excellent question, and perhaps one better suited for some of the folks involved in the cover crop breeding network. I believe I saw a few of them hop on the call here, but it is a relatively long timeline to actually get new cover crop varieties developed and ready for commercialization. And then once the seed is ready, it goes through a period of seed increase, right? So before we can actually get it into the hands of farmers, we usually need several seasons of really intensive seed increase to make sure that there's enough available to ship out to folks. Um, I don't know if anybody else on the call wants to hop on with question or hi, Jenny, I see you. Yep.
Yeah, I can pipe up here. You've got it right that it is a long process, and other folks from the network can chime in too. But in addition to the seed increase process that you mentioned, sometimes the companies that are interested in adopting the variety might want to do some of their own trials in some cases, and yeah, and the increase process also varies a little bit by species. How much seed each species can produce, how will dictate how rapidly we can increase so that we have enough for seed companies to market it. And there's also yeah, there is some lead time that we need working between the company and the network to do licensing and those sort of paperwork pieces of the release process. So it can be a little bit of time once we identify a variety we're interested in.
Thank you, Ginny, for chiming in. For those not familiar, Ginny Moore is with Cornell University. She leads the cover crop breeding network.
We had a comment from Mike saying testing herbicide tolerance would be helpful. And we had a related question from Keith asking if there are any plans to expand the research to other species as well.
Sure, that's an excellent question. And the short answer is yes. We started with species that seem to represent some of the most popular options amongst farmers at the moment to sort of kick off the trials and iron out any wrinkles through this first year. And as we continue in the future, we'll be adding new species and new varieties within those species so that we can hopefully get good representation of all the different cover crop options that farmers might be interested in.
Great. And I know you had mentioned there are future plans to do below ground root evaluation and how that affects the soil microbiome. Are you able to share a little bit about what that will look like in the future?
Sure. So this is something we are really excited about. We're partnering with Felix Frischi at the University of Missouri, who has a lot of experience doing really exciting research on plant roots. So as part of this program, he will be analyzing a number of different cover crop traits to see if, for example, there are differences in rooting depth of different species and varieties, of total volume of roots in the soil, because we do know that plant roots play such a critical role in really pumping carbon into the soil and building up that soil health in farmers' fields. So we're really excited about that. And then later down the road, we also have plans to be looking at interactions between plant roots in cover crop mixtures. We know that a lot of farmers are growing their cover crops as multi-species mixtures, and we have so little information available at the moment about what is really going on below ground. So we'll be doing some screening across the different cover crop species and varieties to look at sort of what does the architecture of their root systems look like? Can we be strategically combining species and varieties that have complementary root systems? So we're really excited to kick off that work in the relatively near future here.
That is very exciting, looking at the multi-species effects. And if we wait one more minute to see if anyone has any lingering questions, I'll ask Etienne, when you're evaluating these performance outcomes of cover crops, how might that align with economic considerations for farmers like seed cost and availability?
Sure, that's also an excellent question. And we do have a team of agricultural economists working on those very questions. So, as we're developing these new and improved varieties, trying to quantify what the value of those improved traits might be, sort of what do we need to be thinking about in terms of justifying slightly higher seed cost? Versus, paying less money for a variety not stated. And there are a number of things that we've been finding already in terms of these new varieties having more biomass, which then leads to quicker gains in terms of soil health. We'll be looking at other factors, like if you're looking for cover crops to use in a grazing context, that can be something that would provide additional economic benefit to a farmer. So breeding specifically for those types of traits. So that's something we're actively thinking about and hope to have some more information on in the near future.
Very exciting. Looking forward to those updates. Last call for any questions or comments for Etienne. Not hearing any, so thank you all for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and learned something new and interesting. The report and other resources are available to download for free on the Center for Regenerative Agriculture website at cra.missouri.edu. And we look forward to hearing more about this great work. Thank you all.